Okay. Good day, everybody. My name is Kris Poria. Welcome to the Early Birds Weekly Explorer webinar. This webinar series is run by Early Birds team to promote disruptive leaders, especially innovators, mostly focus on startup, scale-ups, or who have a minimum viable product or more. We believe that sometimes it is not the product that brings benefit or the change required in any industry or business. Sometimes it is the ecosystem comprising of passionate people, innovators, subject matter experts, and key change agents that bring transformation across our communities and industries. Uh, Today, our guest is Gerard Dache, founder and executive director of Government Blockchain Association, GBA in USA. Gerard is a unique kind of ecosystem builder in blockchain, and therefore that is why we invited Gerard today. So Gerard started the Government Blockchain Association in 2016 and has built an organization with over 15,000 members in 120 cities around the world. He has started over 50 blockchain working groups and has supported public and private organizations in Africa, the Americas, Asia, Europe, and Middle East. Today, we are going to have a chat with Gerard. Attendees, please share your questions through the chat box in the meantime. Gerard, welcome to Early Birds Weekly Explore webinar. Thank you very much for your time today to share your wisdom with us. So let's start with a little bit about your background and why you started Government Blockchain Association. Could you please share, because I was fascinated to hear about your story about the Blockchain Association.
Sure. Well, thank you, Kris, for having me. It really is an honor and a pleasure to be here. So my story, my personal story, is one where I spent some time after college. I spent some time in the military and Army infantry and intelligence. I got involved in the government contracting space, and then what happened was my son in around 2016, I found out my son bought a couple dollars worth of Bitcoin, and when he sold them, he paid for a car, a motorcycle, his college tuition, and living expenses. And I loved him and hated him at the same time. Right? I was working so hard, not making anywhere near the kinds of return on investments he was. But I started looking into this, and I saw that blockchain was really the secret sauce. And at the time, my background was in government, and blockchain was kind of big in fintech, IBM and Deloitte, and on Wall Street and Silicon Valley. But in Washington, in the government space, there really wasn't anything there. And I said, Jiminy Crickets, man, this is going to be big. So so what I decided to do was I said, well, I don't know anything about the subject, so we'll have a meetup. I'll invite some people. And what I learned was there was a lot of people interested in the subject, but there was nowhere for them to go. And I thought if we could just get them in the same room, right, they'll figure out how to solve problems and projects would develop and stuff like that. So I marketed this thing like crazy. I rented this really, really expensive room in a very elegant part of town, and paid $500 for the room. I had 100 chairs, and for maybe 2 or 3 months, I was burning the phones, the email, promoting. And 20 minutes after the event started, our second guest arrived, right? And so I was somewhat demoralized. I said, well, I can't afford this. So then we started meeting in libraries. I could get a free conference room, and a few people would show up, and they were strange, right? The first couple people that showed up were anarchists. Right, they were people that wanted to overthrow the government. Right, they were, we're going to bring it down, and every once in a while, a government person would show up, and it would just be embarrassing. These people looked like they had been behind a computer, so they had no sunlight. Right, their eyes were like burned out of their sockets. But one by one, a small businessman would show up, and a low-level government employee, and today, like you said, we have somewhere between 15 and 20,000 people in 120 cities around the world. Now, what happened was, so I started the meetup in August of 2016, right? But but in October of 2017, somebody just joined. They want to mute. In October 2017, I had another business at the time, and I lost it. So basically, I just lost. I lost all my money, all my revenue, everything like that. It was a situation where sometimes you're faced with a decision about whether you're going to do the right thing or the profitable thing. Well, I had to make a decision, and it cost me, right? And so when I lost everything, I said, well, again, this was just a meetup at the time. I said, well, I've got to make this thing work. So I put my head down and I worked from 6 a.m. till 2 a.m. Monday through Saturday to get this thing off the ground. And that's what it took. And so we were doing these meetups in this bar, this restaurant, and people would show up and they'd say, hey, I'm here from New York. I'm here from Atlanta, Denver. I really like what you're doing. Can we duplicate this? Would you share your slides? And I tell you what, I'm going to share my screen.
Sure.
Okay. So this is a GBA. So in terms of where we're located, this is basically where we operate today. So as you can see, we start in the U.S. So there's primarily in the U.S. But when we got that many chapters, there's no way that I could feed that many chapters. So we created some working groups.
Yeah.
And so here's an example of some of the working groups. And blockchain, and this kind of answers your use case question. Artificial intelligence, acquisition management, asset management, aviation, big data, cannabis, contract management, cybersecurity, economics, elections, emergency management, energy. I mean, if you just look at this list, gaming, grant management,
yeah.
This subject here, governance in DAO, is really fascinating. All kinds of healthcare, identity management, intellectual property. We're just really putting some effort in this one. It's intellectual property for arts and entertainment. So if you know anything about what's going on there with NFTs, there's a lot there. But land titling, again, I'm not going to read all of it. Space, supply chain, telecom. It's a lot.
Wow.
And what happened was, as we started just kind of creating value, then folks in government started showing up. So that we have GBA members in about 500 different government organizations, and this is just if you can see the screen, these are just some of the government organizations around the world. So it's a local, state, national, international, right? And people ask me, when they hear Government Blockchain Association, they immediately think sort of the national government, right? But I'm like, no, because all governments in the world have very similar problems that they're trying to solve, right?
Correct.
Asset management, licensing, permitting, contract, grant management. So we focus on the use cases that are common to governments. And instead of every municipality in the world buying, building, maintaining their own solution for, say, marriage licenses, right? We're working with companies so we can essentially have them build one solution, market it to all the governments, so all governments don't have to duplicate the same efforts, bringing the cost of government down so they have more resources for their people. Yeah. But it's a lot.
Wow.
And then to help individuals get connected with each other. So this is how governments can connect and share. Like, for example, one of our groups is called Artificial Intelligence for Government. Yep. And so that's led by Oki Mek, who's the Chief Artificial Intelligence Officer for the U.S. Health and Human Services Department. That's the third largest government agency in the United States. And so they just get together with government AI people from around the world once a month, and they just share lessons learned and best practices. But the way individuals can connect is we have a member search page. So anybody who wants to be listed in the directory, they can list it by domain, by cryptocurrency, use case, languages. A lot of event organizations use this to find speakers for their events or find people for projects and stuff. So you just search for somebody, and then there's a member page. We all have profiles, activity walls. You can find out about the person. You can find out about the different groups that they're in. And again, this, like you said earlier, this is all about ecosystems, right? Yes. And it was validated for me one night. We were in a Washington chapter meeting, And I heard somebody say, my boss is looking for a voting solution. And somebody else said, oh, I'm also in the voting working group. We're working with a company out of Boston called Votes. Here's your contact information.
Yeah.
And by putting people in geographically based groups and domain based groups, we created a giant human relational database of blockchain expertise.
Yep.
So people can connect, communicate, and collaborate. And then we created all kinds of just really phenomenal content. So this is just some of the videos, by the different folks in the organization. So we have over 8 gigs worth of information on the GBA site. So it's getting known as one of the places where people go to get information. Under the resources page, there's blogs, there's courses, publications. This is all member uploaded content. We've got a training and certification program.
Yeah. So
Blockchain Foundation's the technical, healthcare, legal, and financial specialist. We host events all over the world. I was scheduled to be in Pakistan to be teaching a course to financial bankers and financial folks. COVID kind of blocked that off. But these are just some of the things. And then we've got a big event. The next one that we're doing is going to be in Washington, D.C., called Government Blockchain Week. Incredible speakers. This guy, Don Tapscott wrote the very first book on enterprise blockchain. He's just a phenomenal guy. Scott Sternetta put the first blockchain into operation in 1991. The Satoshi white paper, 3 of the 8 references belong to Scott. So Scott actually taught Satoshi how to blockchain. Yeah. And then we got public sector leaders from all over the world, right? From Alabama to Kazakhstan, the Australian Trade Commission, the Austrian Institute of Technology. This one, because of the work that you do in your sector, Blockchain Intelligence Group, this is a good company for you to connect with. But Romania Court of Appeals, California, Colorado, Virginia, Croatia, just people from all Inter-American Development Bank, IMF, Italian Ministry of Economic Development. So people from all around the world will show up in Washington, D.C. to talk about how blockchain, essentially impacts them to share their knowledge. The UK, United Nations. Yeah. Right. Great. And then the last thing I'll say with this, and that's enough of about GBA, is this is our ethics statement, right? And this was the very first thing that we wrote, and it's the most important thing. So before we had anything else, it's important enough that I really focus on this, but I'll focus on just this 5th one, right? GBA will only pursue goals that serve to form a more perfect union between and among governments and their citizens they serve. We do this by establishing justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense of citizens' rights and welfares, and securing the blessings of liberty and free society. So that's a long answer to a short question.
No, that's great. And congratulations, Gerard. Well done. I think this is a great achievement. And I can understand, given a little bit of my background in media and then, of course, working through our own startup, how difficult it is to break in and then keep building that ecosystem. So really congratulations on that. I have some common questions. As you know, that a lot of us are confused about blockchain. And I know that you have had a lot of experience to, especially, running through this. So are you able to explain us a little bit about blockchain? What have you learned, and are you able to explain that in more of a non-technical way that all of our attendees can understand?
Sure. Well, let me start off with this. I believe that blockchain is literally the most transformative technology in human history, right? And let me explain how it works a little bit, and then I'll explain why I make that statement. And so most people are familiar with Bitcoin. So let me just kind of explain how the Bitcoin blockchain works. So there's a lot of different blockchains, and they're not all exactly the same, but conceptually they're all very similar. So what happened was in 2008, when we had the financial crisis, right? There was a lot of concern about the banks, and a lot of people thought that the governments were bailing out the banks, and all the people at the top were being protected, but it was everybody else who suffered. So a lot of people believe that the motivation for creating the Bitcoin blockchain was was to create a peer-to-peer decentralized system so that you wouldn't have to rely on a third party, right? And so if you, so let me just explain how it works. Let's say, Kris, I'm going to send you a Bitcoin. Now, if I was going to send you $1, we would have to work through an intermediary, right? And there's settlement time. So, like for example, if I swipe my debit card or credit card at your store, right? The bank the bank is going to say, yeah, Gerard's good for it, but you're not actually going to get paid that for probably 3 or 4 days, right? The banks have these very complex settlement processes. Yeah. Blockchain is very simple. If I'm going to pay you some money in Bitcoin, what I'm going to there's a network of say 15,000 different computers, and I'm just going to broadcast out to the 15,000 computers, Gerard sending Kris 1 Bitcoin, and those computers are going to basically check, does Gerard have a Bitcoin? Yeah. Right, in his account, and if they do, they'll say okay, and then what they're going to do is they're going to compete with each other to take all of these transactions, mine and everybody else's. They're just sort of floating out there. They're going to package them into a block, and if you think about this, a blockchain is just a ledger. If you think of like a ledger book, and a block is just a page in that ledger book, right? So these people are going to take all of these transactions, they're going to put them onto a page or onto a block, right? And they're going to say, hey guys, I'm proposing that this page of valid transactions be added to the blockchain, and the rest of them will check, and if it checks out, then they will all decide to add that page to the blockchain, and so it's just a record of transactions. That's really all it is. Now, but it doesn't require a third party or a bank. So let me explain why I believe this is the most transformative technology in human history. Every other technology has really been about communications, and the better our ability to communicate, we could coordinate and control at bigger levels. So we went from being organized around tribes to villages to towns to states to countries to Google, Facebook, UN type organizations, right? Yeah. But what blockchain does is, because you don't need an intermediary in the transference of value, you don't need a third party. So you don't need the bank, you don't need that third party. And what it does is it returns power back to the individual. Mm-hmm. Right? And if you think of the GameStop thing that happened a little while ago, right? What blockchain does is, by disintermediating third parties, that means those third parties don't have control over people. Yeah. Right? And when we talk, people think about Bitcoin, but you can move anything of value across a blockchain, which could be a record of a title, a vote, a healthcare record. Anything that has value can move across this blockchain, and so literally it impacts every single industry. Every single industry that has a transaction of value is impacted, and it's very disruptive. Let me explain from the banking sector just a little bit about how this works. This last year was a pretty rough year, right? But most currencies around the world are pegged to the US dollar. And what happened was our political system here in the United States cannot control spending. Because any politician, if you walk into their office and you say, hey, listen, I'd like to give you my support, but I'd like this funding, they just write it into legislation. And I say to Kris, look, Kris, I'll support your bill if you support my bill. So both of our bills get funded, right? And the Fed, even though it's independent, when the government spends more money than it has, the Fed's got to print more money. They don't have an option, otherwise we default, right? So we have a system where there's an incentive for spending, but there's no check against the spending. So once we got off the gold standard, we just continued to spend more money than we had, and then COVID hits. Yep. After 250 years, we had a national economy of $4 trillion. Once we said, hey, we've got to pass this COVID bill, every politician put their pet project in it. Mm-hmm. So between 4 to 6% of the COVID bill actually was for COVID spending. Everything else was for everybody's projects. And we just started spending money like it was water. And in 1 year, we went from 4 trillion after 250 years. In 1 year, we went from 4 trillion to 18 trillion. Wow. So basic supply and demand, that devalues the dollar significantly. But 60% of all foreign reserves are in US dollars. So when we did that, we didn't just make the US poor, we made literally the world poor, right? And so in March of 2020, a lot of people sold their Bitcoin because we shut down the economy,
Yeah.
right? So at the same time we've been devaluing the dollar, all of a sudden now Bitcoin becomes more valuable. And Bitcoin went from $3,000 to $60,000 in 1 year.
Wow.
So now think of this. I personally don't have any of my savings in a bank, because if I put it in the bank, because of inflation, that value gets diminished. I take that money, I put it in crypto. My crypto has been, I told you what happened to my son, the crypto has been appreciating.
Yep.
Well, when people start to move their dollars, their money out of banks and into crypto, banks need deposits to loan out to other people because they make money when they loan out money, right? They get on interest. Well, what happens when the deposits dry out?
Yeah.
Governments use banks to influence, monitor, and control. Mm-hmm. So if the transactions start happening peer-to-peer outside of the banks, governments lose the ability to collect revenue, yeah, to enforce laws. I mean, the disruptive nature of this is we can't even begin to fathom. So pretty crazy, huh?
Yeah, it is. It is. And attendees, please, while we are talking with Gerard, please, in the chat box, you can use for any questions if you have. So in the meantime, in terms of especially public sector, Gerard, that given that initially your focus was more public sector and how government can use blockchain. So what are the key use cases you have seen so far that based on your working groups globally, what are the key use cases they are picking up already in terms of using blockchain for those use cases?
Well, I will tell you two things about governments. First of all, they're slow to adapt. So they're really at the trailing edge of this. They're just starting to do that. But I will share with you at least a couple stories. So one of them is in the Department of Health and Human Services. They've got 30 different contract writing systems, right? And blockchain, remember, it's just a ledger, but it's a ledger where you can trust it, right? And so there's a lot of companies that they don't want to share their data, but they're willing to write their data to a common ledger, and so that everybody can benefit from it. And so that's what happened in the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. You had all of these different systems. They didn't want to share data together, but they all wrote it to a common system. And they put some machine learning on top of it. And what they found was that that when they were buying different products, companies were charging the different agencies, the different departments, different amount of money, right? And when they identified a disparity, they could go back to the company and said, hey, wait a minute, you're charging that office $10 a seat, but you're charging us $25 a seat. We want you to make sure that you're charging us both the same amount, right? And in that simple act of basically writing that transaction data to a common ledger, right, and then using AI, they saved $30 million, wow, right? And so I just got back from the Middle East. There's a friend of mine there that created a system in the healthcare space where they're using blockchain for organ donations and blood donations. And again, because of HIPAA compliance and all kinds of privacy requirements, they can't share the data, but they can write it to a common blockchain. And they think that they've increased the number of lives through this program by fivefold. Yeah. So literally everything. Land titling is one. In many places in the world, they don't actually have accurate records for land titles, but you can write it to a blockchain. And I don't know if in Australia if you have it, but we have title insurance here. Because if you sell a house and it finds out that somebody else secretly owns that house, it could be a problem. People frown on that, right? So they have title insurance, but with blockchain you don't need title insurance. So literally every industry, but it's just at the very beginning. Most places around the world, what's interesting, most governments, they know that blockchain is big and important. Mm-hmm. They're trying to figure out the use case. Yeah. They say, well, our current systems work just fine. Mm-hmm. Right. I just had this conversation with the government leader recently. But the one area that I think all of them are worried about is the economic impact.
Yes.
Right. So the financial sector is going through the most. The other sectors will definitely be there over time, but they're terrified about this concept of people basically bypassing the financial regulatory system. It terrifies them, and it's inevitable.
Yeah, yeah. And then, based on your insight so far, which region is leading in blockchain, or which
Which,
country is
which,
leading?
well, look, I can't say the United States, right?
Okay.
But there are places in the United States that are doing very well. So, you know, one of the things that's very interesting is the countries that have the most stable systems,
Hmm.
right? There's not as big of a need for blockchain there because there's an old adage: if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Yeah.
It's all the places where things are broken, right, where you see the most activity in the blockchain space and in the cryptocurrency space. Um, but in the United States, again, we have a very tightly regulated control. But some places like Utah County just implemented blockchain for voting, so they use blockchain for a national election. Now, across the rest of the country, it was a total mess. But in Utah County, it was solid. So, but it's very eclectic. It's very eclectic.
Okay. Okay. No, that's great. Thank you very much. And guys, if you have questions, this could be the kind of last chance if you want to push in your question through the chat box. So in terms of
I can share with you some of the interesting projects that we're doing,
yes,
if you like.
yeah, that's
So, all right. So one of the projects that we're working on is something called the Government Business Blockchain Platform. And so I told you before that every country in the world is, every government in the world is trying to solve the same problems, right? I gave a marriage license as an example. What we're doing is we're creating a global blockchain for government services, right? So if you build a solution that's like for emergency management or healthcare, whatever, you can connect it to this blockchain. And then through our chapters all around the world, we can market that product to governments all around the world. And when governments are looking for solutions, instead of individually trying to solve that problem and hiring contracts and do an RFP, they can go to the Government Business Blockchain Platform and say, I'm looking for an identity management solution. I'm looking for a voting solution. And there they can, again, the GBBP Government Business Blockchain Platform is a blockchain agnostic platform that connects to every other blockchain. So it's just like a transportation layer, right? But by doing this, we can bring innovators around the world to customers around the world through this. And we should talk about this with early birds and see if we can do something there. The other one is distributed autonomous gaming.
yes,
So if you think about how lotteries work,
yeah,
right? You have to trust the lottery. Or not just lotteries, but any kind of gaming. You have to trust the folks that are administering the games. We can do that all on blockchain, and you know that all the games are fair.
yeah.
So we have another. We're about to release a report here within the next couple of weeks on the impact of cryptocurrency adoption on governments. Talking about the impact on it's just phenomenal, and we're collecting data from industry sources around the world and creating a report for government. So. Yeah, there's so many. Our space group is working on a land titling on the moon. I mean,
Wow.
just so many really incredible things.
Wow, that's great. Gerard, thank you very much for your time today. And I know that we are done with the time for today, but I'm sure that we will talk further soon. Maybe we can invite you into one of other webinars in coming months. I really appreciate your time, and congratulations again on the great work GBA is doing. And I'm sure that with time, Australia will participate in that as well.
That sounds awesome. And Kris, listen, I've never been to Australia before, so I'm looking to show up there sometime.
Definitely. Thank you very much for your time.
All right. Have a great day. Bye.
You too then. Take care. Bye-bye.